Hey guys, tonight we're venturing into the dusty, ink stained world of historical clerks, those quiet figures hunched over scrolls, who were, according to some, just one squiggle away from summoning divine wrath or eternal blessings. You're about to discover that being a clerk wasn't just about copying tax rolls, it was a full blown magical identity crisis. Because back then, if you had a stylus and good handwriting, people didn't think you worked in admin. They thought you knew how to hex someone. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in a cold stone room with one window and zero insulation. Your sleeping mat is made of something that used to be a sheep, and your spine is very aware of it. Outside, roosters are declaring war on the sun, and inside, a cat, probably sacred, is licking your ink pot. You're a clerk in the ancient world. That means three things. You're literate, you're feared, and your social life is approximately zero. As you roll up from your straw mat and shuffle toward your writing desk, more of a glorified box, you hear whispers from the street. A neighbor crosses herself when she sees you. That's new. Apparently, last week, you wrote a report that mentioned a local grain shortage. And yesterday, her pantry mysteriously ran out of barley. Coincidence? She thinks not. In this world, literacy is witchcraft adjacent. You know letters, you make symbols that carry meaning. That means you might also, just might, know how to curse. Not deliberately, of course, but one misplaced symbol and suddenly, old man, Jorah's goats refuse to eat. The townsfolk have started calling you scribe, with a little too much reverence and a little too much fear. And they're not entirely wrong. Historians still argue whether ancient clerks had real ritual training or just really good PR, but the belief was clear. What you wrote could come true. Like some bureaucratic prophecy machine, your ink and quill were less tools, more relics of cosmic influence, especially when you wrote in red ink. Red ink wasn't just festive, it was feared. In ancient Egypt, red symbolized chaos and was used sparingly, often to invoke danger or denote the names of enemies. You wrote someone's name in red? That was basically signing them up for divine misfortune, or at least a really bad day involving spoiled fish and an unexpected tax collector. You sit down at your desk, your scrolls neatly arranged, well, as neatly as animal skin or papyrus can be. A heavy inkstone rests at your elbow next to the reed pens you carved yourself. And you remember, you're running low on gall ink, the kind made from fermented oak galls, soot, vinegar, and enough bitterness to season a Roman soldier's stew. Ink doesn't just appear, you have to brew it. And the brewing, according to your assistant, must be done under the full moon, or the ink won't bind properly. She's probably read too many temple inscriptions, but you nod anyway. Because the truth is, deep down, you kind of believe it too. After all, there was that time you ran out of black ink and used a batch made during an eclipse. The next three scrolls caught fire, or mold, or both. Hard to say. Either way, they were unreadable, and your supervisor said your handwriting smelled like death. Coincidence? Sure, unless you ask the temple cat, who hasn't looked you in the eye since. Outside, a courier yells for you. Someone needs a contract copied urgently. As you take the scroll, the man flinches when your fingers brush his. It's subtle but telling. He's not afraid of you. He's afraid of what you write about him. You could spell his name wrong. You could forget his land plot. You could, if you were feeling spicy, describe his ox as sickly instead of robust. And there goes his marriage prospects. Being a clerk gives you quiet power, the kind no one talks about, but everyone fears. And if you're thinking, well, maybe you could just explain it's not magic, remember, this is a world where stars determine harvests, dreams are decoded, like texts, and a sneeze at the wrong time of day is a sign of doom. You don't explain. You smile mysteriously. You dip your reed into the ink, and you begin to write. The act itself is near religious. You sit in a specific posture. Your desk faces a favorable direction, west, for the setting sun, in honor of wisdom. Your quill has been trimmed just so, and you whisper a quick prayer to Thoth, God of writing and wisdom, not because you're devout necessarily, but because last time you didn't, your scrolls fell into the cooking fire and your eyebrows haven't fully grown back. The words flow easily until you get a drop of ink on your robe. You freeze. It's red. In the old records, red ink stains are considered omens. Some say it means you've written something too dangerous to exist. Others believe it means you're about to be summoned by a higher authority, divine or otherwise. You try to blot it out. It only spreads. Your assistant peeks in, sees the stain, and backs out silently. She's probably going to light incense or tell the baker you're hexed. Either way, you know this will be the talk of the scriptorium by lunch. You keep writing, faster now, trying to shake the feeling that the ink pot is humming. That's probably your stomach, or it could be Thoth giving you a performance review. Who knows anymore? Outside bells ring. A minor festival probably. You don't get invited. Scribes don't mingle. Not really. You're useful, sure. Respected even. But you're also strange. Unnatural. A man or woman who spends all day whispering to paper, calling symbols into being, shifting destinies by correcting a date or aligning a margin. And you know what? Maybe they're right to be cautious. Because as you lean back and stretch your spine, scrolls stacked around you like miniature tombstones, you smile to yourself. You remember that you're not just preserving the past, you're quietly deciding what history remembers and what it forgets. And that's its own kind of magic. The thing about ink, especially in the ancient world, is that it never meant just ink. Sure, on the surface, it's crushed carbon or iron salts in a base of water and resin, but in your time, as a clerk, it's also a potion, a conduit, a little bottle of secrets, stains, and suspicious smells. You open the drawer where you keep your ink supplies and immediately regret it. The odor that wafts out is best described as swamp meets vinegar with a hint of something cursed. Your assistant calls it vintage. You call it alive because in many circles people believe ink can go bad in more than just the physical sense. If stored improperly, it doesn't just rot, it absorbs energies, dark ones. Some say ink left open overnight might capture wandering spirits, which makes every morning a gamble between legibility and low-key possession. You carefully inspect your black batch, still usable. The red one? Not so much. There's a bit of mold, and the cork looks like it's been chewed, possibly by the cat, possibly by regret. You decide not to use it today. After all, red ink isn't casual. Red ink is symbolic, dangerous. In Egypt, it denoted evil or chaos. In Rome, it was used to highlight laws or names of the condemned. You never write a friend's name in red, not unless you want them to stop returning your carrier pigeons. In fact, There are entire scrolls listing taboos around ink color. Never draft a birth certificate in green, warns one. Never sign a treaty with brown. And my personal favorite, if your ink turns blue on its own, leave the building. Historians still argue whether these warnings had any factual basis, or were just scribal folklore passed down to frighten apprentices into proper storage habits. But there's no denying the cultural weight of ink. Even the ingredients had layers of superstition. Take oak gall ink, the good stuff. It's made from the swollen nodules that form on oak leaves when a wasp lays its eggs inside. A weird botanical bug hotel. Crush those with iron sulfate and gum arabic, and you've got the darkest ink known to your scrolls. But some said the galls only worked if harvested by moonlight, and that too many from the same tree could unbind your tongue. That last part wasn't metaphorical. Some believed poorly balanced ink could mess with your ability to speak. You remember your cousin. He mixed a batch while angry, something about overcooked lentils, and 2 days later developed a stutter so severe he couldn't say scroll without invoking spit. Then there's the question of scent. Most inks reek. A good ink smells like swamp mud and failure. A dangerous ink smells like cinnamon and regret. If it's fragrant, someone probably added cleansing herbs, which means either they were trying to protect the text or hide a curse. Speaking of curses, the margins of royal edicts often carried protective phrases written in special ink, invisible to the eye unless held to fire or polished with lemon juice, according to the legends. You haven't seen it personally, but you've heard of one poor clerk who accidentally revealed one while trying to dry a papyrus too fast. The next day, he tripped over a goat and lost his front tooth. Divine punishment or livestock coincidence? Debatable. But no one's risked citrus near the archives since. Today, your task is to draft a tax notice. Standard stuff. You dip your reed into the black and begin scratching down numbers, names, crop yields. But halfway through, you pause. The ink has darkened, just slightly. You tilt the page. It glistens red in a way that isn't entirely due to sunlight. You check your pot again. Nothing wrong visually, but it feels different. Maybe it's the smell, or maybe it's just that a scroll across the desk unfurled itself, by itself. Okay, fine. It's probably the cat. Still, you say a small prayer to the god of ink. There isn't an official one, but you invent one anyway. His name is Smudgeon. As the hours pass, you continue writing. Each line is a careful negotiation between precision and paranoia. One wrong stroke, and the ink might splatter. One miswritten number, and a farmer might lose their grain allotment. One forgotten accent mark, and a town could be renamed to something wildly inappropriate. You once left out a single vowel and ended up inventing a mythical village called Fartat. It stayed on maps for 3 years. To outsiders, you look serene, head bent, hand steady. But in your mind, it's chaos. You're juggling divine symbolism, legibility, ink volatility, and the occasional suspicious breeze. Your assistant offers tea. You decline. Liquid and parchment are mortal enemies. She shrugs and begins mixing a fresh batch of ink using an ancient family recipe. You watch from the corner of your eye as she mutters over the bowl. Something about keeping the spirits cooperative. She's young and probably over-reliant on ritual, but she's not wrong. Ink making is an art wrapped in layers of superstition and oddly specific humidity preferences. There's an old story that if you make ink while angry, it will burn the words. Another claims that ink made during an eclipse makes any contract signed with it null after sundown. And then there's the one about a traveling scribe who used crow feathers instead of reeds and accidentally summoned a minor demon that wouldn't stop singing. You once tried using a metal nib, just once. It scratched the papyrus and angered your supervisor, who told you that metal carries impatient energy. You didn't ask what that meant. You just went back to your reeds and pretended not to notice how the ink pot kept vibrating for the rest of the day. Late in the afternoon, a messenger arrives with a scroll sealed in green wax. That's unusual. Green wax is often reserved for temple documents or herbalists with questionable licenses. You open it cautiously. It's a request to copy an ancient medical recipe. You sigh. Those are always the worst. Not because they're difficult, but because they often involve words like mummified frog dust and warmed goat saliva. Try writing that 5 times without laughing or crying. As you prep your tools for this next task, you glance again at your ink pot. It's still dark, still ordinary, but you can't shake the feeling that it's watching you. You cap it tightly, just in case. Because in your world, ink isn't just a tool, it's a mystery, a risk, a relic. And as the last rays of sun hit your parchment, turning the black letters a strange shade of violet, you realize that every word you write is soaked in history, myth, and a tiny bit of fear. You don't just write stories, you summon them. You weren't born a clerk, you were chosen, or at least that's what everyone insists. No one quite remembers how it started. Maybe your grandfather copied a charter by candlelight and someone said it glowed afterward. Maybe your aunt once recorded a debt so precisely that the taxman bowed to her. Whatever the origin, it was whispered into the family bones early. Someone in your bloodline had the script, and now it's your turn. You didn't pick up a quill, it found you. That's the myth, anyway. In reality, you were the only child in the village who didn't eat paste and could sit still for more than 7 minutes. So naturally, you got apprenticed to Old Master Tullen, who smelled like onions and correction fluid, and once told you the trick to neat margins was fear of God and a stiff wrist. Still, people around you believed in something deeper. They watched you as if literacy might spread through eye contact. When you first read aloud, even haltingly, your mother cried. Not because she was proud, though she was, but because the village healer said reading could open a spiritual door in the mind, a door that never quite closes. There's an odd reverence that follows you after that. Some say it's a gift, others say it's a burden. A few say it's suspicious that your candles never drip wax when you're working, and that birds seem to linger by your window. You'd laugh it off, but even you've started to notice it's always the same bird, left eye missing, definitely judging you. Historians still argue whether clerks were ever seen as truly mystical or just necessary evils with great penmanship. But many cultures, especially pre-modern ones, treated writing itself as something sacred, something reserved for priests, shamans, or people willing to lose 3 vertebrae, hunching over vellum by torchlight. To learn to write was to submit to ritual. Your early lessons involved copying sacred phrases over and over, not for grammar, but to attune your energy. When you asked what that meant, your tutor said something vague about vibrations and handed you a pine cone. You still have it. You use it as a paperweight and occasionally as a threat. The first time you handled parchment alone, everyone watched like you were defusing a bomb. One wrong fold, and supposedly the gods would strike your name from memory. That was the rumor. The more cynical truth was that parchment was expensive and your master was cheap. But still, You handled it like a newborn or a cursed toad. When you wrote your first sentence, an inventory list for sheep, your hand trembled. Not because of the responsibility, but because someone said the ink you used had been blessed. By whom? Unclear. Possibly a retired monk with poor vision and a sense of humor. Regardless, it gave the list a certain weight. The sheep had names now, personalities, legal standing. One of them, you later learned, sued someone successfully. People began to approach you differently, slowly, like you might rewrite them if startled. You'd walk into the market, and people would nod too formally. At first, you thought they were being polite. Then you realized they were afraid of ending up in the wrong ledger. The scribal robe didn't help. It was supposed to mark you as part of a sacred order, but it mostly just made you look perpetually chilly and mildly haunted. You tried switching to a simpler tunic once. An elder told you you disrupted the balance. A chicken exploded that afternoon. Coincidence? Perhaps. But no one asked you to dress down again. Then came the moment everyone anticipated. Your first solo document, a property record, 3 pages long, written in meticulous detail. You copied measurements, landmarks, even the number of olive trees with painful accuracy. When you finished, you exhaled like you just conjured a spirit, which, depending on who you asked, you had. Because the belief was this: writing created permanence. To record something was to bind it, to make it real. And the person who did that, the clerk, wasn't just documenting reality, they were deciding which reality got remembered. You file that document in a carved wooden chest, locked with a key you wear around your neck. Not because you're worried about theft, most people can't read it anyway, but because, deep down, you've bought into the myth. The idea that written words carry weight, and whoever controls them holds power. And power in your world is a dangerous thing. You remember that night vividly. It was raining sideways. A traveler stumbled into the scriptorium asking for proof of identity. He had no papers, only a coin and a name. You hesitated. Without the proper form, your master would disapprove. But the man's eyes were wild, desperate. So you did it. One quick scribble, a forged signature, and he vanished into the storm. 3 days later, the village received word. A noble had been spared execution due to proper documentation. No one connected it to you, but the ink had barely dried. You kept the draft, hidden beneath a false bottom in your desk. And sometimes, when the candlelight hits it just right, the words shimmer, not in a magical way, but in a memory way. Like the parchment knows it did something important, something real. You lean back in your chair and look around. Scrolls line every shelf. Sealed letters sit stacked like coiled secrets. And you're the one who holds the key to them all. You might not wear a crown. You might not wield a sword, but you write the names of those who do. And in this strange, silent way, you rule the world, one line at a time. Paper cuts are annoying. You know that. Everyone knows that. But what they didn't know, back in your time, was that some believed a careless cut from a scroll could do more than sting. It could nick your soul. You're halfway through cataloging the fish taxes for the southern quarter when your finger slips. Just a little. Just enough to graze the papyrus edge, and suddenly you feel it. That sharp, silent zap, like betrayal in microblade form. You wince. The blood is minimal, but the superstition? Maximum. Your assistant gasps from across the room. You bled on the scroll, she whispers, as if you just sacrificed a goat in the reading room. You hold up your hand, and offer a perfectly reasonable response. It's fine. It is not fine. The scroll now has a blot, not a big one, just a pinprick beside the phrase tuna surplus. But that's enough. The ink wobbled when your blood touched it. It bled into the margins, and in your world, that means trouble, because in certain circles, a blood marked scroll was considered spiritually contaminated, or worse, spiritually activated. Historians still argue whether these beliefs came from ancient curses, temple protocol, or just an early form of workplace drama, but the fear was real. A clerk's blood on a contract might invalidate it, or empower it, or bind the clerk to the agreement permanently, in this life or the next. You grab a fresh reed and dab the spot gently. It smears. That's worse. You mutter a word that's technically not profane, but could get you side-eyed by a particularly pious monk. And then the real dilemma sets in. Do you copy the whole thing again? That's 2 hours of work. Your wrist already feels like overcooked lentils. But if you leave the stain, someone might think you've imbued the scroll with intent, like you're blessing the mackerel taxes, or worse, cursing them. You glance at the stain again. It looks vaguely like a fish. Fantastic. Back in the day, some believed that documents could absorb your essence. If you touched it too much, it could reflect your mood. If you sneezed on it, it might take offense. If you bled on it, it might trap a fragment of your spirit. You once knew a clerk who insisted his headache lasted 3 years because of a particularly vengeful land deed. Every time he saw it, his left eye twitched. Eventually, he burned it. Claimed he heard voices in the ashes. Might have just been the wind or his assistant. Hard to say. But still, you reach for your ritual-smelling salts. Not because they work, but because they make your assistant feel better. She's now pacing, muttering about spiritual bindings and whether she should light a candle. You wave her off. You'll fix it. Somehow. You decide to rewrite. You dip your pen back in the ink, carefully this time, and begin anew. But the paranoia lingers. Every squeak of the quill sounds judgmental. Every scroll edge looks sharper. Even the candle flickers weirdly, like it's judging your spelling. You pause and flex your fingers. That's when you remember the old tale about the scribe who lost all feeling in his hands after drafting a cursed marriage contract. The story goes, the bride's family was so unhappy with the match, they hired a hedge priest to bind the hands that wrote it. The scribe reportedly spent the rest of his life clapping at odd times and dropping things. Did that actually happen? Probably not. But you still avoid contract work between families. Too risky. Your hands ache by the time you finish the copy. No blood this time, no drama, just one pristine, ink-perfect record of fish taxes and social anxiety. You roll it gently, seal it with wax, and mark it with your sigil. A small mark shaped like a fern. Your father's idea. Said it was gentle but unmissable. You've since learned it also looks like an ear. So now half the merchants think you're always listening, which honestly works in your favor. You place the scroll in the outbox, an actual box carved from pine and blessed against mildew, and take a deep breath. The cut still stings. You rub your finger gently and glance toward the shelf of discarded drafts, some with ink blotches, others with bite marks, thanks to a stressed out assistant and her bad habit of chewing things, and a few with, yes, blood spots. Old ones. Dry brown, mostly forgotten. But even those, you hesitate to burn, just in case, because you never know what part of you might still be in there. There's an old belief from the western provinces that each written word takes a sliver of the writer's soul, that by the end of your life, if you've written enough, you become translucent. Not metaphorically, literally. You fade, float, become one with the archives, a sort of ghost librarian. Your master used to joke that's what happened to his predecessor, just vanished one day in the ink storeroom, only left behind a robe, a reed, and an ongoing echo that corrected people's grammar. You never found that story funny. You rub your eyes and stretch. The candles are low now, casting long shadows across the scroll racks. You swear one just moved. Probably the cat again. Hopefully the cat. Maybe the ghost librarian. You whisper an apology to the stained scroll, just in case it did take offense. Then you bandage your finger with a clean scrap of vellum. You draw a smiley face on it, because even ancient spiritual clerical injury deserves a little whimsy. And because deep down, beneath the logic and ritual and reams of records, there's still part of you that believes, just maybe, that the scrolls are watching. And they remember everything. There's a reason you don't write on Mondays, or at least not before consulting the stars. Today the sun rose behind a cloud shaped like a question mark, and your inkpot wobbled without provocation. You took that as a sign, or maybe just a draft. Either way, you delay your morning reports. Because in your world, writing isn't just a skill, it's a ceremony, and one that requires the right astrological alignment. Yes, the stars, the distant, blinking bureaucrats of the sky. People genuinely believe that if you write on the wrong day, under the wrong moon, with the wrong pen hand, your entire scroll could come alive and bite you. Not metaphorically, literally. There's a reason the Eastern archivist sleeps with a reed pen under his pillow to keep the margins from moving, he says. Historians still argue whether this belief was rooted in actual astral calendars or just the medieval need to blame Mercury retrograde for typos. Either way, it stuck. Your desk has a small chart carved into it, phases of the moon, planetary positions, and a column labeled "Do not write these days unless desperate." Today, Mars is squaring Mercury, which means contracts are risky. Ledgers might go missing, and someone will almost certainly misplace the goat census. You sigh and light a stick of lavender incense. Not because it works, but because it smells like you're at least pretending to be calm. Your assistant enters with a nervous expression. The tax record for the Northern Valley is missing, she says, holding up an empty scroll tube. Again, you resist the urge to accuse the stars directly. Instead, you nod and say, let's check the window ledge. Because if you know anything about scrolls, it's that they like to fall or vanish. Or, in the case of Northern Valley documents, become the nesting material for local pigeons. You search the scriptorium like it's a crime scene. Ink trails, feather fragments, a smudge in the shape of Saturn's rings. All signs point to celestial interference, or maybe rodents. Still, you can't rule out the sky. Some clerks, you know, keep talismans next to their quills. Obsidian shards, copper rings, dried lizard tails, don't ask. All are meant to balance astral mischief. You tried a quartz crystal once. It rolled off your desk and shattered a wax seal. You took that as a sign to never again trust anything shiny without legs. Back at your desk, you prepare a replacement scroll, but you hesitate. Should you write today? You consult the chart again. Mars still looming, Mercury still sulking. You briefly consider waiting until Venus ascends, but that won't be for hours, and someone's ox tax is due by dusk. You decide to proceed, but carefully. You select your Wednesday quill, so named not because of the day, but because it's slightly bent and has a suspicious ink stain that looks like the planet Jupiter. Some say Jupiter brings luck, Others say it brings overconfidence and unusually aggressive geese. You're willing to take the risk. As you begin, the wind picks up outside. The window clatters. A scroll topples. Your assistant yelps. You sigh again. This is so typical of a Mars heavy day. You focus on the words, letting your hand move slowly, methodically. Each stroke is intentional, each line a prayer to stability. The smell of ink and lavender settles around you like a protective fog. The wax candle pops, probably a bubble, hopefully not a star wormhole. That's a thing now, apparently. You finish the scroll with a flourish, just as the sun moves behind a cloud shaped like a thumbs up, or maybe a chicken drumstick. Interpretation varies. You seal the scroll, mark the date, and whisper a small thanks to the firmament. You also mutter a warning to Mars, just in case. There's a legend about a scribe who ignored the stars, wrote a royal decree on an eclipse. Everyone applauded until the king tripped, dropped the scroll in a moat, and declared war on the neighboring kingdom due to a water stained word being misread as invade instead of invite. The scribe, he became a chicken herder, literate but plucked. You never write during eclipses now, or equinoxes, or Tuesdays if the moon looks suspicious. You have your boundaries. You glance out the window as the sky begins to darken, not with weather, with mood. The air feels heavy, static laced. Your assistant snuffs the incense, muttering something about astrological congestion. You don't argue. Instead, you open your drawer and pull out your backup chart, the one marked emergencies only. It has phases, star signs, and one extremely detailed drawing of a goat wearing spectacles. No one knows who made it, but it's surprisingly accurate. You check your birth sign, Libra. Today is favorable for editing, unfavorable for originality, which makes sense. Your brain feels like mashed lentils and misplaced punctuation. You stick to editing. You correct a few scrolls, fix a number here, re-ink a seal there. Nothing ambitious. Nothing that might tempt Saturn to rearrange your archives in alphabetical chaos. When the final scroll is set in place, you lean back in your creaky chair and sigh. You survive the stars. For today. You remove the Wednesday quill from its holder and kiss the tip, just a peck, for luck. Or because it's comforting. Or because you're slowly unraveling from spending too many hours alone with paper and planetary charts. Either way, you place the quill back in its carved slot between Sunday spoon nib and eclipse quill. Use only if desperate. Outside, the sky finally settles. The breeze turns warm. A bird lands on your window ledge, left eye missing. Again, definitely judging you, but at least it's not Mars. You didn't hear it. No one ever does. The scroll was there yesterday, tucked neatly in the corner rack, under the slightly judgmental wooden carving of Saint Scriptor, patron of neat margins. But this morning, gone, vanished, evaporated like your patience on audit days. It wasn't an important scroll, just a census list from 2 years ago. Goats, mostly. But it's missing, and that means only one thing. Mice. But not just any mice. These are no ordinary cheese nibbling freeloaders. According to the lore that's crept through clerical halls like candle smoke for generations, these mice are agents, not of chaos. No, much more personal. These are agents of the underworld. You sit very still in your chair. You listen. Nothing but the slow creak of the rafters and the faraway muttering of your assistant alphabetizing the pantry for reasons unknown. Then, there, a faint scratch, then silence. Then a squeak. You're not alone. And this isn't your average vermin problem. These mice are the stuff of scroll room legend, tiny, furry, paper shredding emissaries of the long departed. It was once believed that ancestral spirits who were forgotten or misfiled came back through mice, nibbling away the records of the living until someone remembered to light a candle or donate a spoon. Historians still argue whether this belief came from folk tales, fungal ink poisoning, or just the clerical tendency to blame every mistake on ghost rodents. But the superstition is oddly specific and widespread. You've heard the stories. One archivist swore he saw a mouse carry away a land deed, only for the landowner to fall mysteriously ill the next day. Another claimed a ledger disappeared just after he sneezed near an altar, an offering improperly accepted, the priest declared, as if allergies could offend the divine. You rise from your chair and inspect the scene. No droppings, no chew marks, but the scroll is still gone. You light a candle anyway. Not the scented one. Mice hate lavender, or so your grandmother claimed, right before her entire cookbook was mysteriously nibbled to death. You kneel and peer beneath your writing table. Dust, a pebble, a dead beetle wearing what appears to be a crumb as a hat. Nothing incriminating. Then you check the walls. Yes, those walls. Behind the rows of shelves, there are gaps, tiny channels where wind whistles and the occasional tail disappears. You know this because you've watched. Late at night, when the only sound is your inkpot settling and your will to live cracking, you've seen shadows move. Fast. Intentional. You've tried traps, cheese, spells, a strongly worded note. Nothing worked because these mice aren't hunting food. They're hunting stories. The old belief goes like this. If a person's name isn't remembered in the scrolls for 100 years, they become restless, not ghostly, just forgotten. And their only hope is to send a mouse to reclaim their name from the archives, one nibble at a time. You never believed it, not really, until the day you found a pile of shredded scrolls in the shape of the letter K. No one in the office was named, but the next week, a traveler arrived looking for his great-grandfather's record. Kavanaugh, he said, lived here during the grain wars. You didn't find it, of course, it was gone, but he swore he felt the name in the room. So now, every time a scroll disappears, you light a candle. You whisper a little sorry to the air, and you sprinkle flour on the floor, just a pinch, because if the mice leave tracks, maybe you can trace them back to the story they're trying to resurrect. Your assistant finds you mid-sprinkle. Again? She says, arms crossed. The mice? You nod solemnly. Underworld agents. Looking for closure. She rolls her eyes and hands you a fresh scroll. Or maybe you just misplaced it. Again, she's probably right. She usually is, but still, you sprinkle a little more, just in case. You resume writing. And as you do, the strangest thing happens. You feel watched, not in a malevolent way, more like someone waiting to be acknowledged. You glance toward the window, empty. The ledge, dusty. The ceiling beams, clear, except for one suspicious tuft of fur. And suddenly, you remember a name, an old clerk, 2 generations ago, who supposedly transcribed an entire city's legal code in one summer and then died mysteriously during a nap. No one remembers his full name. You lean back in your chair and whisper, Gareth. I think it was Gareth. There's a pause in the air. The candle flutters. You feel lighter. You smile and reach for a scroll you'd been avoiding. An ancient land grant with half the ink smudged and the margins filled with doodles of what might be tiny hats. You begin to recopy it, and in the corner, without thinking, you add a small line. In honor of Gareth the Swift Handed, no one will notice, no one but the mice. The scratching fades, and somewhere deep in the shelves, a scroll curls gently inward, like it's finally at rest. You spend most of your day surrounded by silence, not peaceful silence, administrative silence, the kind that hums with potential disaster, the kind that whispers, something is overdue. But once a week, everything changes. Once a week, the door creaks open and in walks him, the royal messenger. Or, as your assistant calls him, the scroll tornado. He bursts in, trailing dust, drama, and a faint smell of roasted turnips. His boots are muddy, his cloak is slightly on fire, probably candle related, and his scroll pouch is always bulging. Not with snacks, as you once hoped, but with what he calls urgent documentation, said with the same gravity as a priest holding a cursed relic. He slams the pouch down on your desk like a challenge. 17 this week, he grunts. Maybe 18. One might be a sandwich. You open the pouch with cautious fingers. It scrolls, all right. Some tied with red ribbon, a color reserved for emergency declarations. Others sealed with wax stamps, so elaborate they look like someone dipped a wedding cake in lacquer. This is your least favorite part of the job, not because it's hard, though it is, but because every scroll is like a tiny bomb. Each one might contain news of famine, rebellion, or worse, a revision to the zoning laws. You start untying them one by one, and the messenger leans on the shelf like he owns the place. Had a squirrel follow me the whole way, he says casually. Might have been divine. You nod without looking up. Divine squirrels are fairly low on your list of concerns today. You unravel the first scroll. It's written in hurried script, half in Latin, half in something that looks like someone coughed on a quill and called it prose. There's a note in the margin. Urgent. Review for grammar and ghosts. Typical. You begin decoding, line by line. The content. A land dispute involving two noble families and a communal pond. There are references to fishing, rights, duck population counts, and something called the Great Eel Incident, which you choose not to question. Historians still argue whether scribes were just glorified middle managers or full-blown diplomatic referees, but one thing is certain. When there's conflict, someone has to write it down. You're that someone. Your quill scratches across the parchment. Be it known, you write, that the fishing rights henceforth shall be divided in accordance with the lunar calendar and the temperament of the ducks present. It's not elegant, but it's binding. The messenger watches you with vague curiosity. Ever wish you could just burn 'em all? You pause. The scrolls? No, the nobles. You both laugh, tiredly, quietly. You suspect he's only half joking. The next scroll is a requisition for more ink. From a monastery. In a swamp. You recognize the handwriting. It belongs to Brother Halor, who once tried to dye ink with beet juice and accidentally summoned 3 frogs and a plague of indecision. You write back, gently reminding him that real ink requires gall, gum, and a little less vegetable enthusiasm. The third scroll contains a poem. You blink. It's not bad. It's from a baron addressed to someone named Mistress E. It's filled with metaphors involving parchment, longing, and one very unfortunate stanza comparing his love to an overflowing inkwell of destiny. You reread that line twice. You decide not to annotate. Instead, you slide it into the unofficial file labeled Scandalous Correspondence and seal it with a wink. Figuratively, though your assistant does catch you smirking and raises an eyebrow so high it almost achieves orbit. The next scroll is blank. You frown. Blank scrolls are never good. You flip it. Still blank. You check for invisible ink. Hold it to the candlelight. Tap it twice and mutter the standard incantation for reveal thy purpose, O troublesome parchment. Nothing. You look at the messenger. Did anyone give this to you? He shrugs. Found it in the pouch. Might be a prank or a curse. You place it gently, very gently, in a lead-lined box labeled do not open unless possessed by certainty. It joins two others, one that smells like sage and guilt, and another that once hummed for 3 hours. You spend the rest of the afternoon cataloging, responding, and occasionally exhaling loudly in a way that sounds suspiciously like a whimper. Your assistant brings tea. The messenger leaves with a nod, 5 scrolls, and possibly a divine squirrel. You're left in the silence again. But now it's not administrative silence. It's satisfied. You've answered questions, resolved disputes, saved a romance, avoided a haunting. All through ink. You stretch, stand, and place the final scroll into the dispatched box. Your fingers are stained, your back aches, and your brain feels like it's been pressed between two stone tablets. But the words are out. The stories are told. The chaos for today is organized. And somewhere out there, a duck swims peacefully in a pond now officially shared. A poet sleeps unjudged, and a monk stares suspiciously at a beat. You smile, because being a clerk, it's not glamorous, it's not heroic, but it is magic. You've just sharpened your quill when it happens. A low, ominous knock at the archive door. Not the polite tap tap of a curious visitor. No, this is the boom boom of bureaucracy uninvited. You freeze mid-stroke. Ink blots. Naturally. Your assistant pokes her head around the corner, already pale. They're here, she whispers. You don't have to ask who. You know, the inspectors. Of all the dark forces in your world, famines, royal temper tantrums, mice with afterlives, nothing instills fear like the arrival of the Royal Scroll Verification Board. Cloaks too clean, boots too polished, expressions fixed somewhere between severe constipation and eternal disapproval. One enters, then two, then a third, carrying a clipboard, which in your profession is roughly the same as carrying an execution order. Inspection, the tallest announces, as if you couldn't tell by the smell of stress and sandalwood. He doesn't introduce himself. They never do. Inspectors are like thunderstorms, uninvited, loud, and you always find something ruined afterward. You nod respectfully. Inside, you begin to inventory everything that might cause trouble. The tea-stained treaty, the half-transcribed cow census, the scroll still slightly smoldering from a candle. Incident 2 days ago. You've prepared for this. You just didn't think they'd come today, especially not on a Thursday. Historians still argue whether Thursdays truly were cursed for clerical work, or if that reputation emerged solely from recurring surprise audits. But either way, you felt it in your joints when you woke up. The kind of tension that even 2 mugs of lukewarm barley water couldn't fix. The lead inspector gestures toward your shelves. We'll begin with your archive ledger. You pass it over, resisting the urge to apologize for its slightly damp bottom corner. Condensation from your assistant's questionable habit of placing her soup bowl on official documents. He flips through the pages like he's judging your entire existence based on kerning alone. You use ferns as a sigil? You nod. Symbol of quiet strength. He raises an eyebrow. Looks like an ear. You've had this conversation before. They spread out, moving through your scriptorium like slow-moving, scroll-sniffing sharks. One pokes a stack of charters with a metal rod. Another sniffs an ink pot, then sneezes. You try to keep working, You try, but the weight of their presence is like trying to write a love poem while someone critiques your punctuation in real time. You glance at your assistant. She's pretending to file things, which is admirable, considering the file drawer is empty and she's just moving the same scroll back and forth. The inspector with the clipboard clears his throat. There's a discrepancy in your grain shipment tallies. You blink. Those were verified last solstice. He stares. You stare. Somewhere in the distance, a pigeon coos. Finally, he nods. We'll come back to it, which is Inspector speak, for you've made a note and it will haunt your dreams for weeks. Then comes the worst part, the random scroll integrity test. He reaches into your shelf, selects a scroll, any scroll, completely at random, which, by complete coincidence, is always the one you're least prepared to explain. This time, it's the annual weights and measures report. You haven't read that in months, possibly years, possibly ever. He opens it slowly. Pages crinkle. You sweat. Why does the standard unit for large duck appear twice? You freeze. You look at the scroll. You look at him. That's, because there were unusually large ducks that year. Unseasonal girth. He narrows his eyes. And the note about weaponizing bread? You inhale. Ah, that was a regional military innovation, largely theoretical. He nods slowly. You wonder if you've just implicated an entire province in a car-based uprising. Another inspector mutters something about excessive decorative margins. You mentally curse your assistant's calligraphy phase. Then, finally, mercifully, they gather. We'll file a preliminary report, says the leader. Expect results in 2 to 6 months, which is inspector speak, for we lost interest halfway through and now want lunch. They leave. The door creaks shut. Silence returns. Not peaceful silence. Not yet. You slump in your chair. Your assistant brings you a cup of tea, possibly as a peace offering. It smells like cloves and existential dread. You sip. Somehow it helps, because as exhausting as inspectors are, they serve a purpose. They remind you that in a world where facts are fragile and scrolls are sacred, someone has to maintain the illusion of order. And today, that someone was you. You stand slowly. Your knees pop like punctuation. You walk to the random scroll shelf. You take out the weights and measures report. And because you can't help yourself, you add a footnote. Note, all ducks measured in standard, mood-neutral positions. Bread remains unweaponized. For now, you seal the scroll. You smile. And in the echo of their boots, you find strange comfort. Because even under scrutiny, even with sweaty palms and judgmental clipboards, your little archive still stands. The scrolls are safe. The ink is dry. And no one died of bureaucratic despair. Yet, it starts like this. One drop of ink on your tunic. You don't notice at first. You're hunched over a scroll about grain allocation ratios. A page so dull it could tranquilize a cavalry horse. But then your assistant gasps, and you know it's happened again. You look down. Right on your chest, a blot. Deep red. Not blood. Worse. Red ink. You freeze. Red ink is taboo. Not everywhere. But in your region, it's practically an offense, worthy of exile or, at the very least, strongly worded glances from the village elder with the mole that twitches when she's judging you. See, red ink has a reputation. It's not just a color, it's a statement. A loud, dramatic, unforgiving one. Across time and culture, red ink has been used for corrections, condemnations, curses, and declarations of divine fury. And in your little corner of parchment-based paranoia, it's believed that red ink can, if used improperly, unleash chaos. Historians still argue whether this reputation started due to its rarity, its use in royal decrees, or just its alarming resemblance to open wounds. But for clerks like you, red ink is the bureaucratic equivalent of summoning a thunderstorm and then standing under a tree in chainmail. You try to wipe it. You fail. Now it looks like a tiny demon tried to claw its way out of your sternum and gave up halfway. Your assistant takes a cautious step back. You didn't write anything with that, did you? She asks, eyes wide. You hesitate. You think back. This morning, the commemorative scroll, the one with the list of names from the Wheat Guild. You did write a title, just one, in red, because it felt festive. Oh no. You rush to the display case. There it is. Guild of Wheat, honored members, year 242. The title gleams like a sunset. Beneath it, a dozen neatly inked names, now considered condemned. You swallow, hard. The superstition goes like this. Red ink used on a person's name invokes bad luck, if not outright spiritual erasure. The logic? Blood marks, judicial markings, and war edicts all used red. So to see your name in that hue, that's an omen, or a threat, or a slightly aggressive way to say you've been cursed by poor office etiquette. You imagine the fallout, guild members knocking on your door, demanding spiritual cleansing, a wheat revolt, possibly cursed bread. Again, you pace, your assistant offers tea. You decline, citing emergency. You grab your correction kit, which includes a penknife, a whisper cloth, and a small bag of powdered owl bone. The bone doesn't do anything, but the owl looked very disapproving, so you kept it around. You attempt to scrape the red title gently. The parchment resists. The ink seeps deeper. You try covering it with gold leaf. Now it just looks like a royal blood spill. You sigh. You stare at the scroll, then at your stained tunic. Then you do what any self-respecting clerk in crisis does. You add an addendum. Note, red ink used ceremonially. No curses implied. You underline ceremonially twice. That ought to do it. You send a copy to the guild with a complimentary packet of barley and a small charm shaped like a loaf. Your assistant suggests adding a disclaimer. If rash or spontaneous haunting occurs, consult your village healer. You chuckle, nervously. Because the truth is, deep down, you still kind of believe it. You've heard stories of a scribe who used red ink to annotate a coronation decree. The next day, the new king tripped down a staircase, landed in a vat of honey, and was chased by bees for 3 days. Coincidence? Maybe. But red ink hasn't been used on coronations since. Another tale tells of a merchant whose name appeared in red on a customs list. He vanished. Poof, gone. Some say he fled the taxes. Others say he dissolved into bureaucratic mist. You prefer the tax theory. Mist is harder to invoice. There's even an old ritual among northern monks. If someone writes your name in red, you must immediately write it again in black over a mirror while humming. This, allegedly, neutralizes the ink. You tried it once. The mirror cracked. The tune got stuck in your head for a week. You now avoid mirrors. Back in the present, you finally change tunics. The red blot? You hang it by the window. Maybe it'll fade. Maybe it'll ward off auditors. Maybe both. You sit, you breathe. The ink pot trembles slightly. You ignore it. You dip your pen, black ink this time, thank you very much, and continue the guild scroll. Line by line, name by name, carefully, gently, with all the grace of a sleep-deprived monk transcribing love letters between squirrels. Outside, the clouds shift. A breeze filters in, and from the corner of your vision, you spot the old guild master himself, ambling toward the archive. You brace. He enters. He scans the scroll. He narrows his eyes at the golden red title. He grunts. Nice touch, very festive. You blink. You're not upset? He shrugs. Wheat's dramatic. I like it. And just like that, the curse is broken. Or maybe it never existed. Or maybe you just got lucky. You smile. You exhale. And you resolve never to use red ink again unless absolutely necessary. Or at least not on names, or livestock, or anything that might sue you. Because in the end, ink is just ink. Until it isn't. You're halfway through your midday snack, bread, cheese, and the existential dread of unfinished reports, when the conversation turns to your career. Your assistant says it first, between mouthfuls of lentils. So, did you always want to be a clerk? You blink. What a question. As if anyone dreams of ink-stained fingers and lower back pain from the age of 11. You chew thoughtfully. Not exactly, you reply, but the stars aligned. And by stars, you mean an uncle with a surplus of parchment and an alarming desire to teach you calligraphy while discussing bowel irregularities. But here you are, in your town. Clerks aren't just born, they're called. At least that's the story people like to tell. That somewhere, the moment a child spells their name in the dust with a stick, the ink spirits whisper, "Ah, yes, a future of document duplication awaits." It's a flattering myth, mostly told by clerks. Historians still argue whether clerical roles were assigned by aptitude, patronage, or divine selection. But among common folk, being chosen as a clerk was once viewed as spiritual favor. After all, you were granted knowledge, letters, access to royal seals. You held the power to record reality, or at least argue about it legibly. There's even a superstition that only those born under certain celestial alignments, like Mercury in ascendant or the waxing goose moon, could truly hear the parchment, which might explain why your birth certificate has a tiny doodle of a goose next to your name. Or maybe someone just got bored. As a child, you didn't show immediate signs of scribal brilliance. You once tried to draw a dragon and accidentally reinvented the concept of fork. But then you found a scroll in a barrel, old, moldy, half legible, and something clicked. The ink, the smell, the mystery. You wanted in, so you started copying things. Shop signs, chicken invoices, your neighbor's passive-aggressive note about firewood theft. By 10, you had your own wax seal, made from a melted candle stub, and an old ring that may or may not have belonged to your grandfather's tax collector. You were obsessed. Of course, not everyone approved. There's an old belief that too much writing could drain a person, not just physically, but romantically. As in, the more time you spent with scrolls, the less likely you'd ever find someone to scroll with. You remember the warnings. No one wants to kiss someone who smells like parchment. You'll dry up your humors. All that sitting will flatten your instincts. And worst of all, your hands will get clerk hands, which, to be fair, is a real thing. You hold a quill now with the same posture as a stressed bird attempting embroidery. Your fingers have permanent calluses. Your wrist pops when the weather changes, and your handwriting is so precise it once got mistaken for witchcraft. You've made peace with it, mostly. You tried dating once, a baker's daughter. She liked your poetry, until she saw your ink-stained tunic and realized you'd annotated her love letters. For clarity, you didn't talk after that. Another time, you flirted with a merchant's son by offering to archive his receipts. He ran fast. So, yes, the rumors persisted. Clerks were often seen as otherworldly, or at least slightly cursed, too quiet, too pale, always squinting, always muttering about margins. There was a theory that clerks absorbed the emotions of the documents they transcribed, that if you wrote too many sad things, you'd become melancholic. Too many legal scrolls, you'd turn dry and argumentative. Too many tax records, you'd smell faintly of panic and old grain. You once copied a dramatic eulogy and spent the next week crying at goats. Coincidence? Maybe. But the goats were surprisingly understanding. Still, the job came with perks. You could read, you could write. People brought you offerings: bread, chickens, jars of jam in suspicious flavors, just to make sure their names were spelled correctly on property records. One man gave you a hat. You still wear it when the archives get drafty. More than anything, you had access to stories, to lives. You knew which farmers secretly owned 4 pigs, which noble had a second family, which priest couldn't spell salvation. You knew the secrets that paper whispered, and you kept them, mostly. Now, as you chew your cheese and stare at the ink stains on your sleeve, you wonder, were you called to this, or did you just stay? It's hard to say. The assistant finishes her lentils and shrugs. I mean, you could have been a bard. You snort, too loud. Or a blacksmith. Too sweaty. A shepherd. You pause. Too sheep. She nods, conceding the point. You stand and stretch. Your back makes the sound of a quill snapping in protest. You glance around your scriptorium. Scrolls everywhere. Inboxes, outboxes. We're not sure what this is. Boxes. Ink pots of varying reliability. Shelves labeled with loving sarcasm. Candles that smell like wisdom. And your name, etched on a plaque by the door. Clerk of records, keeper of quiet chaos. It suits you, because maybe you weren't born a clerk. Maybe you became one the day you realized this strange little life of ink and whispers, of stories and secrets, was yours. And maybe that's magic enough. You're in the middle of your morning routine, organizing quills by emotional damage level, when you spot it. A scribble, tiny, faint, barely noticeable, right there, in the margin of yesterday's logbook, next to the words, chicken theft, resolved. It's not your handwriting. That's the first unsettling thing. The second, it reads, but was it really resolved? You freeze. There's a long-standing superstition among clerks, passed down from ink-stained fingers to ink-stained fingers, that the margins are not to be trusted. Margins are liminal spaces, empty but watchful, the space between order and chaos, the unwritten borderlands where thoughts drift and sometimes get trapped, where a scribe's wandering mind leaves behind odd fragments, jokes, warnings, occasionally a recipe for soup. Historians still argue whether scribes intentionally hid messages in the margins, or if generations of underpaid record keepers simply snapped and started doodling as rebellion. But what's clear is that the margins have secrets. You flip back through the logbook. Sure enough, on a page from last week, there's another. A tiny symbol, a triangle with 2 dots and a smile, tucked beside a report on wheat rot. No one you know uses that mark, and definitely not next to fungal updates. You dig further. In a livestock record, he knows. In a tax scroll, not today. In a scroll you haven't opened in months, just the word run. You sit back in your chair. Either someone is playing a very specific prank, or your archive has developed opinions. You call your assistant. She squints. That triangle? That's the mark of the scribbler. You blink. The who? The scribbler, she says, matter of factly. Old legend, rogue clerk, fired for excessive calligraphy. They say he never left, just hides in margins now. You stare at her. She sips her tea. You check the shelf behind you. Nothing. But the air does feel slightly smug. You've heard similar tales. Myths of clerks who grew tired of proper formatting, who began encoding messages in footnotes and flourish. One even allegedly predicted a fire 2 weeks before it burned the royal stables by sketching a suspiciously detailed matchstick in a livestock journal. Since then, the belief persisted. Marginalia can carry warnings or even curses. You remember that one marriage record you found years ago? Perfectly standard, except in the top right corner was the phrase, "She dreams of goats." No one understood it. 6 months later, the couple divorced, citing livestock incompatibility. Coincidence? You wish. Now, as you flip through your current registry, you start to notice a pattern. The scribbler has favorites, tax records, criminal reports, anything involving potatoes. And the messages? They're not random. They respond. In the scroll about the baker's missing flour, check the miller's smirk. In the scroll detailing an overpaid guard, he naps behind the shrine. You test the theory. You write a question. Who took the apple tarts? In the margin of a miscellaneous theft scroll. You wait. Hours pass. Then, just after lunch, you find it. A reply in smaller, loopier script. Check under the bell tower. You go. You look. You find crumbs and one slightly guilty cat. You return to your desk in awe. The scribbler is real, or very dedicated, or possibly you in your sleep. You don't rule it out. The next day you write again. Do you work alone? The reply, don't we all? A little dramatic, but fair. You begin archiving these exchanges. Quietly, you start a new scroll, hidden in the back of your shelf, titled Dialogue with the Margins. It begins as a curiosity, then it becomes something else. You start asking for predictions. Small things. Will it rain? Will the mayor trip again? Will the geese finally revolt? And the margins reply, obliquely, poetically, once with a drawing of a shoe with wings. You interpret it as, yes, soon, you're not just a clerk, you're a correspondent. One day, your assistant catches you whispering to a stack of scrolls. She says nothing. She just nods slowly and backs away. You can't blame her, because part of you wonders if the scribbler is even human anymore. Maybe he, or they, or it is the collective frustration of centuries of clerks, a lingering force born of late nights, aching hands, and too many unthanked footnotes, a presence that lingers in the margins to help, or heckle, or just remind you that the words you write matter, even the little ones, especially the little ones. And so, each evening, you sign your last scroll with a flourish. And, in the margin, you leave a tiny triangle with 2 dots and a smile. A thank you, a nod, I see you too. Because in a world ruled by records, someone has to look between the lines. You've handled pests before. Mice with messianic complexes, moths with a taste for footnotes, but nothing quite prepares you for what you find today. You pull an old scroll from the deepest shelf. Dust swirls. The air smells like mildew and forgotten birthdays. As you unroll it, something drops out and lands on your tunic with a soft plop. A worm, not a big one, barely the size of a lentil, but very much alive. You scream internally. Your assistant peeks around the doorframe. Did one move again? You nod solemnly. She sighs. That's the third this week. And so begins what your ancestors referred to very quietly as bookworm season. Now, to be clear, these aren't just ordinary worms. In the folklore of scribes and scroll keepers, bookworms weren't simply pests. They were portents, harbingers of misfortune, little wriggling omens of everything going terribly, irreversibly wrong. Historians still argue whether this fear came from actual outbreaks of parchment devouring larvae or from the psychological horror of watching your month's work slowly disappear into the belly of a bug. But one thing's agreed upon: clerks were afraid. And you, unfortunately, are now among them. You examine the worm. It's inching toward the edge of your sleeve like it owns the place. You flick it off into a dish labeled samples, next to a dried beetle and a quill with suspicious bite marks. The scroll it came from? Eaten. Lines are missing, letters half formed. There's a hole right where the word bequeath should be, which feels both symbolic and rude. You sigh. You pull out your emergency kit: a tiny brush, a candle, and a pouch of crushed mint. Worms hate mint, allegedly. You sprinkle it like holy dust across the shelves. Your assistant adds a charm drawn on rice paper and stuck to the wall: a stick figure with a sword fighting what looks like spaghetti. Just in case, she mumbles. There's a reason for all this panic. Long ago, in a town not unlike yours, a clerk awoke to find his entire archive riddled with holes. Worms had eaten every scroll, every deed, every treaty. The town descended into chaos. No one could prove they owned anything. People stole goats, swapped spouses, and reinvented tax laws based on interpretive dance. The clerk, ashamed, fled into the woods, never seen again. Some say he lives among the worms now, whispering corrections into the wind. Since then, a single worm sighting is treated as a bureaucratic bad omen. You start checking everything: old scrolls, new scrolls, even the miscellaneous box that's 30% misfiled poetry and 70% things that smell like vinegar. You find two more larvae. You whisper apologies to the parchment. You pray to Thoth, and you light a stick of worm-repelling incense, which smells like angry rosemary. Then comes the hard part: telling the mayor. You draft your report carefully. Dear esteemed and occasionally available mayor, it is my duty to inform you that an infestation of scroll-borne parasites has been discovered in the northwest quadrant of the archive. Immediate action is recommended to prevent the loss of legally binding documentation and, more importantly, the municipal charter's original spelling of hedgehog. He sends back a response, a single line scrawled in haste: burn everything, start over. I never liked hedgehogs anyway. You do not follow this advice. Instead, you launch Operation Scroll Shield. You and your assistant create a new protocol: worm patrol twice daily. All incoming scrolls must be inspected under candlelight. A quarantine shelf is established, lined with dried rosemary, salt, and one very stern rubber duck. It was the only thing available with a permanent frown. Still, you remain nervous, especially when you find another worm. This one's bolder. It chewed through a treaty, left a trail, and curled up in the word peace, like it was napping. You sigh. Then you get creative. You invent a spell. Well, technically, it's a song. You call it The Ballad of the Boring Bug. You sing it while sorting scrolls. Your assistant joins in, off-key but passionate. The lyrics are mostly threats and rhymes about digestive failure. Surprisingly catchy. It works, maybe. The worms stop appearing. The scrolls remain intact. The air feels lighter. You reward yourself with tea and a full hour of pretending the shelving doesn't need relabeling. But you don't relax completely, because deep down, you know the truth. Scrolls remember. They remember the bite marks, the panic, the violation of being chewed by something that doesn't even appreciate margins. And so, in the final act of prevention, you add a new entry to the archive's official scribe manual: Pest Protocols and the Prevention of Papery Apocalypse. If a worm is found, do not scream unless it's Tuesday. On Tuesdays, screaming may help. Store scrolls in cool, dry places. Avoid using parchment made from suspicious goats. When in doubt, mint, candles, and public shame. Above all, respect the margins. That's where they begin. You roll up the manual, tie it with string, and place it on the top shelf. Safe. For now. You don't notice it at first. You're too busy coaxing your newest quill into cooperation. It's stubborn, slightly crooked, and has all the charm of a rebellious parsnip. But then the feather twitches. Just a little. You pause, watch, wait. It twitches again. You drop it. This is not your first quill-related betrayal, because in your world, quills aren't just tools. They're chosen. Or more ominously, they choose you. There's an old superstition, passed from parchment slinger to parchment slinger, that says a proper quill will accept its writer, that it will settle into your hand like a handshake from fate. And if it snaps, if it splays or splits or weeps ink tears onto your favorite tunic, that quill has rejected you. You, dear scribe, have been found unworthy. Now, historians still argue whether this belief came from genuine mystical reverence or simply the fact that medieval quality quills were about as reliable as a one-legged stool on a windy hill. But the myth held strong. The quill chooses the clerk. So every time you need a new one, it's a ritual. You don't just grab any feather. No, you study them, hold them, listen to them, figuratively, though one did whistle at you once. Goose quills are common, but considered temperamental. Swan quills, elegant but snooty. Raven, reserved for magical documents, or occasionally dramatic grocery lists. You remember your first? It was stiff, shiny, very official looking. It snapped on your second stroke and shot ink into your left nostril. You still have dreams about it. Your current quill, an aging but loyal piece from a rather plump duck named Mervyn, has lasted 3 seasons. That's a record. You two have been through so much. The flood of misfiled ledgers, the ink shortage scandal, the great blotting panic. You even repaired it once, with string and hope. But now it's weakening, refusing to form loops, refusing to believe in you. And so, with a heavy heart and a small biscuit in Mervyn's honor, you begin the selection process again. You visit the feather vendors in the square. She knows you. Oh, she says, eyeing the ink on your sleeve. Back for another heartbreak? You nod. She lays out a selection. They shimmer slightly in the morning sun. One curves with dignity. Another flutters with arrogance. You reach toward one, but before your fingers touch it, the feather falls over. She shakes her head. That's a no. You try another. It rolls away. And then, from the bottom of the pile, you spot it. Not the biggest, not the prettiest, but steady. You pick it up. It doesn't wriggle, doesn't flinch. It just waits. You test it on scrap parchment. A single word, clarity. The ink flows. You don't breathe. Then, cautiously, you write again, continuity. Still smooth. Your assistant peeks over your shoulder. It hasn't attacked you yet? You shake your head. She claps. You've been chosen. You don't say anything. But inside, you feel it. That tiny glow. Like the warmth of a candle you forgot you lit. The affirmation of compatibility. The quiet miracle of something just working. Of course, not every clerk is so lucky. You've heard the stories. One scribe went through 12 quills in a week. eventually used a spoon out of spite. Another tried to bind two rejected feathers together in some sort of unity pen. It burst into flames. She became a bard. There's even a tale of a monk who found a golden quill under his pillow. He wrote one word, illumination, and vanished in a beam of light. Or possibly debt collection. No one knows. But you? You've got yours now. You christen it Fern. Why Fern? Because it sounds calm, reliable, and slightly unimpressed with drama. You and Fern return to your scroll. Together, you rewrite the torn section on grain allocations. With such ease, such fluidity, you almost forget how painful this usually is. You make a mistake. Fern forgives you. You cross something out. Fern doesn't splatter in protest. It's beautiful. You even feel bold enough to try a little flourish at the end. Fern obliges. You place the quill gently into your inkwell. Whisper thanks. Your assistant watches with mild concern. It's just a quill, she says. You smile. That's what they want you to think. Because the truth is, in your strange, ink-soaked life, the bond between scribe and quill is sacred. It's not about vanity. It's not even about superstition. It's about trust. This quill won't leave you in the middle of a decree. It won't explode during a love letter. It won't ruin a treaty and start a war over poor penmanship. And in a world where history hangs on a well-formed loop or a misread curve, that kind of reliability is everything. So tonight, you sleep easier. Fern rests beside the parchment, and the margins stay quiet. You're sorting census data, mindless, repetitive, gently soul-crushing, when a local farmer bursts through the archive door, panting and flailing. He slams a muddy envelope on your desk. It's a sign, he says. She knew. She predicted it. You blink. Who? The clerk, he cries. From last year. She said there'd be a frost by the new moon and that my pigs would act strange. They did. They danced. You stare at the envelope. Inside, a copy of last year's harvest report, annotated, in tidy ink. Possible late frost. Watch pigs. You sigh. Not this again. Because once every generation, or sometimes twice a week, a scribe makes a prediction. Not a bold prophecy with thunder and flaming scrolls. No, more like an educated guess scribbled in the margin of a livestock ledger. Something casual like, this looks bad, or expect mold. Then, when it inevitably comes true, the myth spreads. And before you know it, clerks become oracles. Historians still argue whether this belief in scribal prophecy stemmed from actual predictive skill or from the simple fact that clerks, by virtue of their jobs, saw everything first. You read the letters, you track the crop cycles, you notice when the fish deliveries smell suspiciously ambitious. You connect the dots, but to the average villager, you're a seer, which is deeply unfortunate because now people bring you questions. Will my goat get married? Will it rain during the festival? Should I invest in turnips or spiritually detach? And you give the only answer you can. Unclear, but they always leave satisfied, which means the cycle continues. It started, you think, with the calendar incident. A clerk scribbled storm likely in the corner of a weather log. The next day, a barn flew into a tree. After that, she was hailed as a prophet. Literally, people threw herbs at her and chanted softly. Then there was the potato prediction. Not a strong year. Months later, the great potato collapse of 14. People still wear commemorative aprons. You try to avoid it. Really. You scrub your margins. You label your guesses as guesses. But even then, the archive gets blamed. Last month, a merchant accused you of cursing his shipment by listing it under miscellaneous. You didn't. He just mislabeled his spices as aggressively nutty, and customs seized the lot. Still, the myth persists. You write a simple report on regional rainfall. Someone reads into it and declares you forecast a frog migration. A love letter you copied verbatim gets published as the Sad Moon Prophecy. You once sneezed during a council meeting and someone named a child after it. And when you actually try to be helpful, forget it. You recall the time you wrote, in all sincerity, the riverbank path is unstable. You sent 5 letters, filed a report, added a sketch. No one listened until the miller's cart sank halfway to the axle. Then it was, why didn't you say something? You did. But being an oracle, apparently, only works when it's unintentional. Your assistant leans in now. Do you think maybe you are a little prophetic? You give her a look. She shrugs. You did say yesterday that the candle rack was tempting fate. It caught fire 3 hours later. You mutter, that's just called experience. She raises an eyebrow, but it's not just predictions, it's how you say things. People believe clerks choose their words carefully, which is hilarious considering how often you label things probably potatoes or cursed but manageable. There's even a theory that your ink, yes, your literal ink, absorbs intention, that the shape of your letters, the curve of your loops, contains meaning beyond mortal comprehension. You tested this once, wrote, beware the goat on a blank scroll. The next day, the goat escaped. Correlational, absolutely, but the townsfolk don't care about logic. They care about results. So now, they ask you for readings. You oblige, mostly because it's easier than arguing. Today's reading, a suspicious looking weather log, a shipment of fish that definitely isn't fish, and a scroll labeled urgent that contains nothing but stick figure drawings and the word help repeated 12 times. You tell the villagers, the sky is undecided, avoid seafood, and someone is having a very complicated Tuesday. They nod wisely, but as the sun sets, you find yourself alone in the archive, rereading your own margins. And you wonder, maybe scribes do see patterns others miss? Maybe writing something, inking it into the world, does make it real. Maybe your quiet observations and accidental warnings are just enough to shape the stories that follow. You light a candle, you pick up fern, and you write, tomorrow, prepare extra firewood, just in case. You've just finished transcribing a report on barrel theft, riveting stuff, when you hear a hiss, not from a cat or a person, but from paper. You pause. You lean close to the offending scroll. It's quiet now, innocent, as if it wasn't just whispering something sibilant about secrets. You poke it. It hisses again. You pull your hand back, not out of fear exactly, but out of a growing suspicion you've stumbled into something fringe. As in, there's a growing belief, mostly among the particularly paranoid, that paper remembers. Not metaphorically, not emotionally. Literally. People say that every scroll, every sheet, every slip of parchment retains a memory of what was written on it. That it remembers who held it, how they felt, and, most dramatically, whether they lied. Historians still argue if this belief came from old religious texts or just one really spooky tax audit. But the theory has persisted. Paper catches secrets, which is deeply unfortunate for you because your entire life is built on paper. And you've touched a lot of secrets. There's the scroll you copied about a noble's secret debts, sealed twice, labeled not important. There's the love letter addressed to someone who definitely wasn't the recipient's spouse. And of course, the infamous will that divided 3 sheep and a haunted mirror between 17 heirs. You know things, and you've touched things that knew more. So now, with this hissing scroll, you hesitate. It's an old report, water damaged, smells vaguely of lavender and bad decisions. You remember copying it last winter. The ink was thick. The words came slowly. The original scribe had a flair for drama, underlining every third phrase and capitalizing danger like it was a personal brand. Now it writhes faintly under your fingers. You don't scream. Instead, you do what all rational clerks do in moments of mild document possession. You whisper, "Not today, thank you," and gently place it in the archive quarantine basket. The basket is full. You consider a second basket, but the superstition lingers. Because, allegedly, if someone touches a cursed scroll, especially one soaked in scandal or sorrow, they might absorb its energy, mood swings, strange dreams, a sudden obsession with 14th century fencing techniques. You've seen it happen. Well, you've seen someone get really into fencing and also misplace a bunch of ledgers. Maybe it's not causal, but you're not taking chances. You decide to test the theory, cautiously. You pick a mundane scroll, a shopping list from 2 years ago: flour, fish, 3 cabbages, one mysterious root. Do not ask. You touch it. Nothing happens. You try humming. Still nothing. Then, from the scroll's edge, a corner lifts and folds. You blink. It folds again. You call your assistant. She brings sage. Together, you waft smoke across the scroll. It curls, then settles. You both stare at it. Eventually, it unfolds. You nod. That's probably fine. But the notion of memory haunted paper sticks with you. You've heard stories. A clerk who burned an old ledger and then dreamt of every debt it contained. Another who filed love letters by mistake and began writing poetry in her sleep. One poor soul who archived a cursed recipe and developed a sudden craving for pine cones. You wonder, what have you taken in over the years? You touch your own hands. They're stained, permanently, not just with ink, but with the faint outline of every scroll, note, and errant doodle you've ever handled. Maybe that's why you remember things you shouldn't. The precise number of turnips delivered to the mayor's cousin, the exact curve of a missing merchant's signature, the date when the sky turned green, and no one mentioned it. It's all there, somewhere, written into you. So now you start wearing gloves, not because you believe the paper is dangerous, though the jury's out, but because it makes people feel better, including yourself. You create a new form, the energetic residue disclosure slip. You require it for all scrolls older than 5 years or with suspiciously poetic titles. You host a document cleansing ceremony. There's music, there's mint tea. Someone brings a haunted ledger just for fun. It moans once and then goes quiet. You sleep better after that, but you still keep the hissing scroll in a separate box, labeled sensitive, may remember too much. And once in a while, on particularly quiet nights, you unroll it just a bit, just to see if it still hisses. It does, and you smile. Because at the end of the day, memory is what keeps your job meaningful. Every mark, every whisper of ink, every faint echo of a decision long made and long recorded. It's not about fear, it's about continuity. Even if sometimes it sounds like a snake. The new decree arrives in a scroll thicker than your wrist and tied with a ribbon so aggressively crimson it could double as a warning sign for emotional instability. You untie it cautiously. It unfurls itself like it's exhaling centuries. At the top, a gold-inked header that reads, Standardized Terminology Initiative. Your assistant leans over your shoulder. That sounds suspiciously like, you both say it together, a new filing system. You shudder. Clerks don't fear war, famine, or even plague as much as they fear reclassification. Because when rulers, councils, or board scholars decide the existing categories are too chaotic, they do the unthinkable. They reorganize. Historians still argue whether standardized terminology ever actually improved record keeping or merely satisfied the inner control freak of some overly ambitious noble. What's certain is this: for every classification rule created, five problems are born. You scan the scroll. New codes, new terms, new layouts. Chickens are no longer small livestock, but avian agrarian assets. Taxes are now compulsory civic gratitude. Even scrolls have to be labeled tangible linear data flows. You want to scream into a pillow stuffed with outdated index cards. You glance at the archive. Thousands of scrolls, all categorized the old way. Scrolls labeled with words like misc, spooky noises, and invoicing for probably potatoes. Now, all of it is wrong. And worse, non compliant. You start to sweat. You gather the scribes, a war council. You present the decree. The reactions vary. One sighs so deeply it sounds like a cave collapsing. One laughs, then cries, then eats a quill. One starts writing a farewell letter to his chair. Your assistant drafts a memo titled, "We regret to inform you that logic has died." You all agree on one thing: survival requires adaptation. So you begin. First, the crosswalk scroll, a translation chart between old labels and new. Goats, Caprine units, storms, atmospheric reckonings, accidental arson, unintentional thermal relocation events. Second, a test scroll. You rewrite a page from the Lost Barrel incident using the new terms. Original. A barrel rolled into the stream. It was wet. We retrieved it. Slightly moldy. New version. 1-1. Cylindrical goods container underwent autonomous fluidic migration. Post-retrieval status? Spongiform. You gag. But the worst is yet to come. Renumbering. You've always labeled things sensibly. Scroll 1A, 1B, 1C. Occasionally 1C prime if someone messed up. Now they want document. Sector 5.23 key subgroup 7. Civic barrel logs. Item number 4E-5 alpha. You wonder briefly if you can fake your death and become a traveling luthier. But no, you are a clerk, and clerks endure. You update the ledgers. You relabel boxes. You create an entirely new shelf just for scrolls that now qualify as temporal disputes with emotional side effects. And as you do this, something strange happens. You start to enjoy it, just a little. There's a rhythm to the new structure, a perverse poetry to decentralized wood product overflow incident, a smug satisfaction in watching a chaotic archive bend slightly, grudgingly, to your will. You revise your cheat sheet. You give each code a nickname. Code 47F becomes the saucy goat. Code 18Z is that one with the pants. You're not supposed to have fun with it, but you do. Still, not everyone adapts. One scribe refuses to convert. He calls the new system blasphemy, wrapped in bureaucratic hosiery. You assign him to the vault of obsolete terminology. He never returns. Some say he's still in there, arguing with a scroll labeled Ye Olde Taxi. Others start smuggling in forbidden labels, tiny tags in the old system, hidden in sleeves, sewn into tunics. You find one tucked under your biscuit tin. Real file, birds. You decide to let it slide, because the truth is, no system is perfect. There's a saying among the older clerks: reform is the scroll that never ends. And they're right. Every generation invents new words for old problems. They rename goats, but they never solve goat-based chaos. They redefine theft, but the barrels still go missing. And the longer you live in the archive, the more you realize it's not about being right, it's about keeping up, about helping the future make sense of the past, even if the words keep changing. So you finish the reclassification, you seal the scrolls, you hang the updated code chart by the door, next to the old one labeled Here There Be Drama, and you rest, for now, because you know the next reform is already lurking, somewhere, in a council chamber, in a bored scholar's quill, in a goat with aspirations. But you'll face it, label by label, loop by loop, with fern in hand and just enough sarcasm to survive. Today's emergency is, unfortunately, musical. It begins with the arrival of a bard. Now, bards are not inherently alarming. They wear nice boots. They smile often. They rarely demand tax documents. But this bard has something far more dangerous than a lute. He has a scroll, and he wants you to verify it. You blink at the parchment. It's crinkled, smudged, glittery. The title reads, The Deeds of Sir Hummock the Brave, as officially and poetically documented. You already don't trust it. I'm touring the provinces, the bard says, with a grin that screams emotional disruption. Needed authenticated. For truth and legend balance. You sigh. Because this is not your first bard-induced paperwork spiral. There's a long, bizarre history of clerks being used to legitimize epics. Historians still argue whether this collaboration was ever officially sanctioned or whether it just happened. But the belief took root that if a clerk wrote it, it became real. And that, dear listener, is a very dangerous idea. Because while clerks pride themselves on accuracy, bards pride themselves on flair. You prefer ledgers. They prefer dragons. You use ink. They use metaphorical fireworks and dramatic pauses. The bard leans in. So, can you just stamp it? You squint at the scroll. First line, Sir Hummock, born of thunder and two sausages, defeated the moon beast of Lesser Crump with a mighty yawn and a particularly sharp chicken. You put down your tea. There is no moon beast. Crump is not lesser, and chickens are not certified weapons. You glance at your assistant. She's already preparing the poetic exaggeration intake form. You begin your process, cross-referencing, verifying, comparing with battle records. There is indeed a Sir Hummock, but he was a mill inspector. The only beast he fought was structural mildew. You gently point this out. The bard waves you off. Interpretation, emotional truth. You frown. The emotional truth of a moon chicken duel? Exactly. And that, in a nutshell, is why your profession is constantly at odds with artists. Still, there's precedent. In certain towns, scribes were expected to preserve bardic tales for posterity. These bard-backed scrolls became semi-legal documents. One tale of a pig who saved a village from bandits became the basis for 3 lawsuits and a statue. Eventually, some scribes fought back. You've read the legendary rebuttal scroll That Definitely Didn't Happen, Volume 1. It includes diagrams. You return to Sir Hummock. Page 4. And lo, he whispered tax codes into the ear of a sleeping hydra, thus ending the famine. You take a long, slow sip of your now cold tea. The bard beams. Powerful, right? You nod. It's certainly memorable. You suggest a compromise. You will issue a clerical plausibility certificate. It states that the events may represent symbolically embellished accounts with thematic relevance to verifiable persons. It's vague. It's bureaucratic. It's beautiful. The bard takes it. He bows. He sings you a song called Ode to the Quiet Ones, about scribes who saved civilizations by correcting grammar. You cry a little. But once he's gone, You do what all clerks must. You file the scroll. Now, there's a special place in the archive for bardic materials. It's lined in velvet. It smells faintly of pine and overconfidence. The shelves are labeled exaggerations, mild, metaphors that caused fights, songs involving goats, too many, unverified heroic acts, potentially moon related. You file Sir Hummock under mild to lyrical embellishment, Appendix C. You sigh. Because as silly as it is, part of you likes these scrolls. They're messy, inaccurate, sometimes dangerously whimsical, but they hold something else: joy. A little mischief, a little myth, a reminder that not every scroll has to be about census, fraud, and mildew tax disputes. Some can sparkle, some can yodel, and that matters too. That night, you find yourself humming the bard's song. You pick up Fern, and you write a note in your personal ledger. Today, someone thanked a clerk through music. I didn't hate it. You underline it twice, because maybe the real deed of Sir Hummock wasn't fighting a moon beast. Maybe it was helping a tired clerk remember that stories, even ridiculous glitter dusted ones, are part of the record too. There's a knock at the archive door, not the timid kind of someone requesting birth records, or the huffy kind of someone disputing a chicken license. No, this is a firm, confident knock. You open it and find a child, maybe 10, maybe a goblin in disguise. Hard to tell with the lighting. She holds out a scroll with both hands. It's tied with yarn, decorated with pressed flowers, and sealed with what looks like frosting. I'd like to register a secret, she says. You blink. A secret? She nods solemnly. A very important one, but I want it recorded, so it's real. You stare at the scroll. You stare at the frosting seal. You stare at the child. And then, like the bureaucratic fool you are, you say, "Come in." You clear a space on your desk, carefully moving 3 tax disputes, a cursed ink blotter, and a folder labeled Nope. She places the scroll gently in the center. You ask, "Would you like this filed under anything in particular?" She thinks. Maybe things that might matter later. You pause. Because absurd as it is, this request isn't without precedent. In some towns, clerks were asked to record non-events, dreams, rumors, fragments of overheard conversations. The belief, strange but persistent, was that writing these things down gave them weight, that a documented secret had shape, gravity. Historians still argue whether these preemptive scrolls had any real function, but a few turned out shockingly relevant. One random note, "Gerald smells fishy," was later used in a smuggling trial. So you humor her. You break the frosting seal. Inside, in large, determined letters, "I found a door in the hill." It whispered my name. It sounded like an old kettle. You read it twice. Then you look at her. "Would you like to include a map?" She grins, produces a crayon sketch. There's a hill, a tree, a suspiciously accurate chicken. You nod. You take a fresh sheet, label it Secret Entry, Voluntary Disclosure. You copy the scroll, attach the map, add a note. Pending further kettle-based verification. She beams. Now it's official. She skips out the door. Your assistant leans in. "Did we just record a fantasy?" You shake your head. "We recorded a possibility." She raises an eyebrow. "Is that part of our job?" You smile. "It is now." You add the scroll to a new box. You label probable nonsense. Do not dismiss. And then something even stranger happens. Other people start bringing secrets. A baker arrives. Wants to confess he sometimes names his bread. A constable admits he lost a helmet 2 years ago and wears a soup pot instead. Someone files a whisper they once heard from a tree. You begin assigning color codes: blue for rumors, green for confessions, gold for mystical murmurs involving steam or goats. It becomes a thing. You post a sign: voluntary secret registration, no judgment, just ink. The submissions flow in. One reads, I don't like parsnips, but I do like lying about it. Another, the river asked me to stop throwing bread. I agreed. A third is just a doodle of two hands shaking, labeled Peace Treaty between me and my reflection. You don't understand most of them, but that's not the point, because somewhere along the line, the archive stopped being just a place for tax forms and hay related disputes. It became a place for memory, for possibility, for all the things people carry but can't quite say out loud unless someone agrees to write them down. So now each evening, you read a few. You light a candle, you pick up Fern, and you transcribe the day's secrets, carefully, without commentary, just the facts as they arrived. Eustace thinks the moon is watching him. Today I pretended to be a mushroom. It helped. I'm not scared of the dark. I'm scared of being seen in it. You file them. You respect them, because secrets, however silly or quiet, are truths in disguise. And in your archive, truth, even crayon colored, belongs. It starts with a sneeze. Not yours, though yours follow moments later in a trio of increasingly unhinged honks. No, this initial sneeze comes from the scroll of lineage, a document so dusty it should probably be legally classified as sediment. You had to retrieve it this morning, thanks to a visiting noble who claimed descent from someone important, possibly magical, or maybe just unusually tall. You unrolled the scroll. It sneezed. Then you sneezed. Then the candles sneezed. It was a whole thing. Now you're itchy, congested, and face to face with one of the strangest beliefs in all of clerical superstition. Scrolls can get sick. Yes, sick. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, but physically unwell. Historians still argue whether this notion arose from mold damage, ink decay, or one very unfortunate bout of archival mildew that smelled suspiciously like old cheese. But among seasoned clerks, the idea persists. You can catch a cold from a compromised scroll, which is why you now sit in a robe, sipping vinegar tea, surrounded by quarantined parchment. Your assistant, ever the realist, wears a beak-shaped mask filled with herbs and mutters containment protocols every 5 minutes. You respect her commitment, and yet, for all the absurdity, there's truth beneath the legend. Scrolls are made of animal skins, vegetable pulp, even seaweed if the quartermaster was feeling avant-garde. And when stored poorly, they grow things. Fuzzy, smelly, microscopic things. So yes, the sixth scroll may be less myth, more mold. Still, you treat it gently. You give it a warm spot near the hearth. You whisper apologies when you sneeze again. You even drape a tiny blanket over its edges. An old sock, technically, but the intention counts. But the illness spreads. You find blotches on the tax ledgers of reconciliation, a rash of wrinkles on the festival registry of Uju 8. One scroll appears to be developing hives. You initiate full quarantine. Shelves are sealed off. Dehumidifiers, also known as bowls of rice and prayer, are deployed. A local healer arrives, utterly confused, but leaves you with sage bundles and strict instructions to stop touching weird things with your bare hands. Too late, you sneeze again. It's not just the scrolls, it's the archive itself. The walls creak more than usual. The air feels damp, dense, like it's chewing on your words before you can finish them. Your ink turns sluggish, Fern feels feverish, and worst of all, the margins begin to blur. You gasp, not from the sneeze this time, but from the realization the scrolls are forgetting themselves. Because in the belief system of your ancestors, illness isn't just decay, it's memory loss. A sick scroll can lose its story. A fading scroll can take history with it. A coughing archive, that's a civilization's amnesia waiting to happen. So you act, you write, you transcribe feverishly, literally and metaphorically. You copy every page that looks weak, every passage that smells of vinegar and doom. You re ink letters, redraw symbols. You whisper the names of towns long gone just to keep their syllables alive. Your assistant joins you. Together you save what you can. A list of tavern debts, a ledger of haunted pottery, a map showing where the goat rebellion of last spring was supposed to happen, but didn't because goats are famously disorganized. Every scrap matters, every curl of ink, because your job has never really been about preserving paper. It's been about preserving memory, culture, chaos, context. And so, wrapped in socks and scrolls, sneezing into the future, you record. Eventually, the air clears, the mold retreats, the scroll of lineage stops wheezing, the margins sharpen. You light one final sage bundle. You thank the walls, you thank Fern, you thank the ridiculous belief that scrolls can get colds, because if not for that, you might have ignored the warning signs until the ink had vanished forever. You close the final quarantine log, and you write a new entry. And today the archive got sick, but it got better because we listened. Then you file it under recovery, institutional, mildly contagious. And you smile because some beliefs are nonsense. But some, they save the archive. You're alone in the archive tonight, not dramatically alone. No thunder, no candle flickers, no spectral whispers asking about overdue census forms. Just peacefully, bureaucratically alone. The shelves loom gently in the twilight. You breathe in that distinctive scribe's bouquet. Ink, parchment, and whatever your assistant spilled last week that still smells faintly like pickles. Tonight's task isn't urgent. It's one of those quiet duties you assign yourself when the world outside forgets you exist. Conducting a scroll census. Yes, that's a real thing. Every 3 years, or whenever the council panics, you must account for every document in the archive. But what begins as inventory often becomes reflection. You hold a scroll from your early days. The ink is young, the margins crowded with notes, your notes, written in a smaller, more hopeful script. One margin just reads, "Does this count as important?" You smile, because that's the eternal clerk question, isn't it? What counts? The mighty treaties, of course, the royal orders, the dramatic declarations involving chickens and bridge tolls. Those get the seals, the gold ink, the fancy ribbons that tangle in your sleeves. But then there are the others, the overlooked, the almost forgotten, like the anonymous complaint scroll signed only "A very concerned cabbage," or the delivery log that notes "Arrived on time, bird included, not discussed," or your personal favorite, a list of banned phrases for town meetings. "No more moo if you agree," it says firmly. You run your fingers along the parchment. It's soft with age, and you wonder what strange, winding stories might be woven from these trivial lines. What pieces of real human life hide in the gaps? Historians still argue whether clerks shaped history or merely observed it, but you know better. Because every loop you pinned, every margin you filled, every little label you stuck onto a chaos laced world, it mattered. It all mattered. Even the spelling errors, especially the spelling errors. You once miswrote Council of Nobles as Couscous of Nibbles. They kept it. It became tradition. You shelve the scroll gently. You whisper, "Rest easy, little nonsense." Then you find it. A scroll you've never seen before. not in your handwriting, not cataloged. It simply sits there, wedged between seasonal ghost reports and suggestions for safer festival candles. The label? To the future clerk, whoever you are. You unroll it. Inside, in shaky script, if you're reading this, then I hope the ink still flows. I hope the shelves still stand. I hope you've laughed at least once today. You sit down because you suddenly feel seen. The scroll continues. We are the watchers of quiet things. We preserve the silly, the strange, the stubborn truths. When others forget, we remember, even if it's just the name of the horse that kicked the mayor during the solstice feast. You laugh out loud. Then you cry, just a little, because this is what it means to be a clerk. Not a hero, not a legend, not even a particularly well fed citizen, but a rememberer, a quiet guardian of absurd, beautiful details. You pick up Fern, and you write your own scroll. To the next clerk, the ink will betray you, the quills will fight you, the people will misunderstand you, but the margins will always welcome you. The archive, like you, is made of fragments, and that is enough. You file it. Right next to the one you found, under Legacy Whimsical. And you close the ledger. You blow out the candles. You whisper, "Good night, archive." And the shelves, ever so faintly, creak back. The candles are out now. Just the soft hiss of a settling scroll or the slow tick of ink drying on the edge of a quill remain. You sit in the stillness, eyes heavy, the warmth of the archive cradling you like an old blanket that smells faintly of dust and lavender wax. Outside, the world hums gently, far away, muffled, polite enough not to intrude. Inside, there's only breath, paper, peace. You let your thoughts soften at the edges. Maybe you're still holding Fern. Maybe your fingers are smudged with ink. Your elbows ink stained from a long day of accidental artistry. Or maybe it's all a memory now. A quiet little dream. One where goats wear titles, scrolls catch colds, and secrets bloom in margins like wildflowers. There's no urgency here, no deadlines, no dragons, no dramatic revelations. Just quiet moments, filed gently in the back of your mind, labeled safe and not urgent and worth remembering someday. So if your eyes are still open, let them drift. If your shoulders are still tense, let them fall. And if your heart is still racing, remind it. There's nothing left to worry about tonight. You've written the words. You've shelved the chaos. You've kept the story alive. And tomorrow? Well, tomorrow will come. But tonight you rest, dear scribe. You rest.